Hey everybody, Riot Mort and Riot Kent back for the patch 12.14 rundown, where we talk about what's coming up in the changes on Wednesday. It's a new patch, new things changing, trying to make the meta even better. A lot of tournaments coming up. So yeah, let's talk about some changes. Kent, how you doing today?
I'm ready, Mort. We have some spicy things possibly coming up for all you hardcore players. So,
That's not. I don't. Overall, it's gonna look like a big patch. I don't think it's actually that big a patch, but we'll see. We'll see.
yeah, I think the feel of the patch will not feel that much different, other than like there are a lot of bug fixes, so that feels better. But
Yeah,
the actual change list we have, it's gonna look long, but
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
Mort's probably right.
let's get into it. Let's get into it. We can talk about it as we show up. So, first off, long-term change. I think everyone's happy to see. Krugs will now guarantee to have at least one item. So no more zero-item Krugs. Thank God. Happy days.
Yep, very good change. Gonna be very happy about that.
Yep. Thank you, Linda. Armory timers, big one here. But now you can actually see when you have an armory open, there's a timer. It'll show you how long until it'll make the selection for you. This is not the same as the stage timer. It's a 30-second timer. But now you can see it and you won't get caught off guard and be like, why did it pick the thing for me? So this is really cool to see. Good job to the UX team.
Yeah, and to be clear, like it'll be on the bottom basically where your armory is, and so you'll see it with your armory there, and it's it'll be clear that like that's not the stage timer. So.
Yep. And then double up, a nice quality of life change. If you have a full bench and you were going to open an orb that would contain a champion that would result in a champion starring up, it'll actually let you open it. You won't have to like clear the bench and everything like that. So really nice quality of life change there.
Yep.
Cool. All right, on the trait side, Cavalier. Cavalier 2 gets a small nerf. 3, 4, 5 get buffed. We're just trying to make the difference between 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 a little more worth it. So it's worth going deeper in Cavalier, especially at that 5. Get a pretty big buff there of the extra 25 armor and MR that gets doubled if they're charging. So hopefully this makes Cavalier a little bit more worth investing in.
Yeah, we're seeing the vertical not perform as well as we'd like. It's still kind of exciting because like having a unit zoom around with an emblem is really fun, but power-wise, it's a little bit on the low side, and so we're making sure the vertical is strong enough and you want to chase it.
Yep. Dragonmancer has fallen off a little bit. We're pretty happy with their health totals. It's just not really getting the damage of that big, exciting carry you're really looking for. So we're upping the base damage just a little bit. Remember, this is the base AP that scales per star level and things like that. So hopefully this brings Dragonmancer back into the meta. We want things like Dragonmancer Nunu and Elise to come back. Lee Sin carry. Trying to bring that back here with this small change.
Yeah, and if we nerfed Volibear and Swain in the last patch. I think Swain's in a good spot. Volibear could use a tiny bump, and so this Dragonmancer kind of fills in that gap, gives him a little bit more damage that he needs.
Guild has constantly been a very good performing comp. And let's be real, it's a Talon in every comp. Talon giving your entire team 10, 12, 14, 16 AD. Talon being Talon. It's just a lot of power, and AD is a very valuable stat. So it can't really have one of the best champions and assassins also giving your team that much power. So we are cutting the base AD from Talon from Guild from 10 to 5. This should hopefully open things up a bit where it's like you don't have to always play Guild Zaya, Guild Varus, Guild this, Guild that. And there might actually be other builds out there, but should still be okay for Guild comps itself.
Yeah, we talked about this briefly in the post-mortem, but basically AD and AP, we shouldn't value them equally just because, I mean, AD is a lot more valuable in general because all units will deal damage and, scale off attack speed off of your other things and deal a lot more physical damage. So that's part of the reason why we're lowering this.
Tempest. Tempest 2 getting a pretty big nerf. I know this doesn't look big, but like losing half the damage and losing another 5% damage is a pretty sizable amount. We still want 2 Tempests to have that stun. It's supposed to be a cool utility thing you can opt into. So if you want to do that, you can. There's a world where this number is supposed to be as low as 2%. Maybe we get there. But again, 2 is still valuable. But 4 and 6 get a buff. And I know this looks small, but if you think about this, or excuse me, 6 and 8 get a buff. But 8 Tempest basically says delete half their health in true damage. That is a lot of power. I admit I'm a little nervous about this, but 6, 8 Tempest hasn't been a thing for a while, so Let's see if this does it.
Yeah, I mean, if you read this as like the enemy team has 50% less health, that's really powerful. So 8 Tempest is going to be really strong.
Yep. Warrior. I think we've gotten a lot of feedback that just like the inconsistency of it, and sometimes you can go 5, 6 autos without procking feels pretty bad. So gonna lean into that a little bit. I think this is gonna make some of our set designers sad, but it'll go up to a 50% chance to proc. But obviously we have to bring the damage down. Now you'll notice 4 and 6 here. The number's green, even though the numbers went down. Basically, what I'm trying to communicate here is that 2 warrior is basically supposed to be very close to neutral. It's like one was a 39.4% buff and the other is a 40% buff, so very close. Whereas 4 and 6 are very slight buffs, on the other hand. So TLDR, 4 and 6 warrior should be doing more buffs, and the trait should just be a little more consistent.
Yeah, no more of the, not doing much and then suddenly auto and you one-shot them. It's going to be a lot more consistent and like the burst is going to be less. So you just kind of see more consistent damage, but also like hype moments where like bigger numbers pop up that don't necessarily one-shot whatever you're hitting at a low rate.
Yep. Cool. All right. Executioner. This is an interesting change. It's supposed to be a very small buff, not a large buff. But the idea is that, especially with 2 Executioner, it's very hard to get them down to that low health threshold. And then when it crits, it's like, okay, I guess. So it ends up feeling not very powerful. So we're going to let it crit more often. So you can crit as soon as they're below half health. And so you're seeing a buff to the crit threshold at 2, 4, 6. But you get less critical strike damage at each of those thresholds. So you should get to experience the fun of Executioner crits more often. Overall, this should be a very slight buff, but nothing major.
Yeah, it's mostly that like this trait now is going to be exciting because you'll see, crit numbers all the time. You focus on like building more crit damage because you'll be critting a lot more often, that kind of thing. And so it's a very clear identity of what you should be going for when you go down this route.
Yep. Spell Sword. This is another one that like it's interesting because Spell Sword's not bad by any means, and I think a lot of people are willing to run 2 or 4 Spell Sword, especially for a Deja carry. And assuming Deja's good, it won't be that bad. But going 6 or 8 just really isn't worth it, and so we're just trying to nudge it a little bit more into worth it. So if you want to go 8 Mirage, Spell Sword, get that Deja, you can get some pretty high AP totals. It's not a massive buff by any means, just a light nudge.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about one of the bigger changes here. Okay.
The juicy stuff.
Okay. Systemically, there's been a problem with one of our systems in the game for a long time, which is that star AD scales per star level. So if you have 40 base AD, at 2-star you have 72 because it scales 80%, and then at 3-star it scales another 80%. So you can see here as an example, Ezreal went from 40 to 72 to 130. Ezreal, the AP champion, having 130 AD is a lot of AD. And so this led to 3-star champions having ridiculous amounts of AD. Nidalee, for example, had 162 base AD. That is a wild amount of AD. Way more than we wanted. It really led to really bizarre situations as well, where like Katarina in the set 6 meta, even though she's an AP champion, half of her damage would be physical because she's just an assassin with a lot of AD doing very large auto crits. It basically puts us in a situation where so much of the power budget is in their autos, we can't really put much power budget in their spells. We have to keep nerfing them over and over and over. It doesn't feel good. So we're finally addressing that by making a very large systemic change here, which is when you scale up on star level, you will get 80% more health and 50% more AD. So this is a much smaller scaler. So using Ezreal as the example here, you can see he went from 40, 72, 130 to 40, 60, 90. That is a big nerf to 3-star Ezreal's AD. What this allows us to do is put the power back in their spells. So Ezreal gets, more spell damage and can do that. And we don't wind up with this situation where 3-star champions just have ridiculous amounts of AD. This is especially relevant for Astral, which can basically force 3-star champions. So it's a pretty big change. But interestingly enough, and we'll go over it, you might not even notice it if we've done our job right. So, Ken, anything to add before we start breaking into the changes?
Yeah, no, I think we're shooting for like a lot of 2 stars to be almost neutral. 1 stars will be a little bit better, and then 3 stars um, will be a little bit weaker on the auto side, but like attack side, but we'll be able to give more power back into the spell. So
Yep.
yeah, as we go into some of these, it'll make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Well, you'll want to keep an eye. So we had to touch every champion to do this. But as Kent said, the goal is pretty much neutral for a lot of champions. What you'll want to notice here is basically AD champions, they're going to be about power neutral at 2 star, and you'll see that with some appreciation of the scales. AP champions are going to get nerfed on their AD side. And again, I use Ezreal as the example that, like, yes, Ezreal doing less auto damage is a good thing for the game. And then if there are tanks should generally be the same as well. There are some nerfs and buffs in here, which we'll talk about. These are things that we're going to highlight as we go. But generally, this should lead to a much healthier scaling and situation here. So, cool. All right, I'm going to jump into these. Really, on the 1 cost side, you're going to see a lot of neutral. We're not trying to shift a lot here. Some examples to talk about here are like Set, for example. Set 3 loses a bunch of AD, but he gets it back in his spell AD ratio, which is good. So that's just kind of what we want. Set should be power neutral, for example. Vlad's a counter example where it's like Vlad 3 is going to have 40 less AD. Good. I don't need Vlad 3's autoing for 130 or more, but he gets a little spell damage to compensate to keep Vlad where he should be. The only targeted nerf specifically in here is Nidalee. You will notice Nidalee 1 little stronger, Nidalee 2 little weaker, and Nidalee 3 a lot weaker. We do not need Nidalee 3 having 162 AD here.
Yeah, one of the things we were aiming for, especially with I mean, one of the things we were aiming for with Astral units is because of their reliability and how easy you can 3-star them, their power levels at their 3-star levels is shifted down slightly. And so Nidalee will still be really good when you hit her, in stage 3, but she falls off a lot earlier than other 3-star 1 costs. She should still be able to carry you a decent amount of time, but you'll need to find something to replace her. But it's okay because you spend a lot less gold looking for her than for a lot of the other units who don't, show up in your shop with Astral.
Yep. On the 2 cost side, same thing. Some things we want to talk about here. Ashe is getting a pretty big adjustment here. You'll see later we're also lowering her attack speed. We really didn't want her being like a pure AD champion. Ends up with a little less AD, but getting quite a bit of spell power actually to compensate. So maybe there's an Ashe carry build out there. I think that'll be pretty good. Jinx is another one here. That Jinx ends up power neutral at 2-star on the AD side. A little weaker on the 3-star side for Cannoneer, but gets some spell damage. But Jinx, we also snuck in a very nice quality of life change, which is the mana refund with her missed missiles. I playtested this a little bit, and what ends up happening is you throw your missiles, one of them hits, the other 2 don't, and you get 50 mana back. It actually feels pretty good. I do think there are actually some like fun Jinx carry builds that can get you some really good top 4s here. Other than that, nothing too crazy here. You see like Kiana as an assassin, lost quite a bit of AD, gained some spell damage, aiming for neutral here. Yone is the one that maybe could be determined as a buff. It's really light though if it is. You can see Yone 1 with a lot more base AD. Yone 2 ends up pretty close to neutral. But a little less magic damage. And so like Yone 1 with Warrior 2 early could be perceived as a buff. Yone 3 should be neutral. Very light stuff though. But otherwise, a lot of neutrality here in the 2-cost space.
One of the positives that this gives us too is if you look at Tristana, her spell AD% went from 165, 170 to 175, where like barely scaled per star level to
Yep.
140, 170, 210. So it's like a lot clearer that like leveling with Tristana gives you this power, and we can kind of stretch this even further if we wanted, just because her now base AD is a lot lower. And so that way, a lot of these AD units we like in the past we just had to keep it flat at every star level, but now we can do this thing where we
Yep.
scale it up.
Yep. On the 3-cost side, Anivia is probably one of the bigger benefactors here. Gets a little less AD, obviously, but gets some spell damage. 25 at 2-star, 50 at 3-star. Diana, same thing. Being an assassin is going to auto for less, but the orbs will hit a little harder, especially at 3-star. Olaf's another one that gets hit kind of hard. Olaf 3 doesn't just gain 72 AD. That goes down, but does gain some attack speed from his spell. And then obviously the elephant in the room, Varus. Varus losing, close to 40 AD, that is definitely going to be a nerf. That's intended. He's very consistent. He doesn't need to be that insane. And then Volibear, we're just targeting a very slight buff here because the AD wasn't really what made Volibear powerful. It was the damage, and we are upping that damage a bit.
Yeah, and to reiterate, unlike Varus, which is the same as Nidalee Point, where you can hit him with a lot less gold, it's a lot more consistent, and so because of that, he's gonna fall off a little bit earlier in the game. So you can use that extra gold to basically supplement your comp, and add power in other places to be able to carry yourself to that first place, rather than just having a very, very, very powerful and consistent 3-cost champion carry you to first place.
Yep. On the 4-cost side, a lot of neutrality here. Hecarim, Nico, Ornn, etc. Ending up very similar. Ones to talk about here, Sona's getting some extra spell damage to compensate for that loss of AD, and because Sona just needed a buff. Xiaoyu is another one here that gets a bit of a buff, especially at 1-star. Gaining that extra 15 base AD makes an early Xiaoyu just a little bit better than it is on live. 2-star, you can see the AD is the same, but we get some spell AD back. So Xiaoyu kind of get buffed. Not quite, the 12-12 level, but in a little bit better spot. The 2 targeted nerfs here are Talon. We do want Talon going down a bit. It's a light nerf, but Talon especially provides Guild, and yes, I know we nerfed Guild, but still doing a lot of damage and still takes down key backliners pretty well. And then Xayah, even after all these changes and running our sims, we were finding Xayah overperforming just a little bit. So trying to bring Xayah down to kind of the same level as Corki, kind of the same level as other carries. But overall, you shouldn't really notice too much here. And honestly, I still think Xayah and Corki are very, very good. So, yeah.
Yeah, Xayah in particular, DPS was too high. So really trying to target her and lower her DPS to bring her down to the level of combat pacing that we want, where she's not just wiping frontliners way too easily.
Yep. Finally, on the 5-10 cost side, nothing really crazy here. Pike, lower AD, which matters a lot for an assassin, gains it back in some spell damage at both 1 and 2-star. This is a bit of a slight buff to 1-star, to be clear. Or no, it's not. It's about the same. Never mind. Yasuo, same thing. Better AD at 1-star, but the spell damage goes down a little bit. Yasuo might be okay here. Otherwise, nothing too crazy here, because most of these times these champions aren't being 3-starred anyway. So these numbers all look pretty much the same.
Yep. One final thing about this entire section basically is that with these changes, we'll see the damage recaps make a lot more sense. The AP units will have a smaller proportion of AD damage, but a higher proportion of magic damage as we intended. Where before that, we were seeing Nami 3s, for example, do tons of physical damage, and not as much magic damage. She's not that heavily of a damage unit, but she still bounces twice and flies her AD damage so high, that kind of thing. So things will make this, I think this is long-term going to make the game a lot healthier.
Yep. Now, all this is to say is this looks like a lot of changes. We literally touched all 58 champions. But from what we can tell, it doesn't change the game that much. So give it a try. Let us know. But honestly, especially for most players, you won't notice it as the goal. It's one of those behind-the-scenes systems that you should trust is doing good things for the game, but really isn't supposed to affect the balance that much. So hopefully that's how it ends up playing out. Let us know. Again, I really wish we didn't have to patch note all 58 and show you this, but really it's not changing a lot, and it's not supposed to be very balance impacting.
Yep.
Other than Nidalee and Varus, but
other than the ones highlighted, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to actual balance changes. Ashe, as I mentioned, we didn't need Ashe being the highest attack speed secret carry where you're actually supposed to play her Deathblade Hurricane now that Varus has been nerfed and everything like that. So we're bringing down the attack speed, but letting her cast a little more often. And as you saw with the AP buff earlier, maybe there's actually some AP builds with Ashe now. So hopefully you can see something there.
Yeah, we've seen people not really try to itemize Ashe. Sometimes people do, but she's never really a key target for itemization. And so with these changes, hopefully some people will be incentivized to build her with some sort of AP build as a caster.
Yep. Nami. Nami has been a problem all set. A 2-cost that you can reliably 3-star that heals a lot is probably not good for the game. I think this has kind of shown that early game healing in this large amount, combined with someone like Silas If you could imagine a champion like Vex from the previous set with getting a bunch of healing, it would be a little crazy. I think healing numbers were a lot lower last set. Nami's doing a lot of healing. So what we're doing is we're bringing down her healing a lot. She still will heal, so it's still possible to heal and put AP and have her heal, just less so. This is intended to be a nerf to Silas. This is intended to be a nerf to Astral. We just want her healing less. She gets some damage back to compensate. So again, if you want to put like death cap on her and items like that, it can still do well. We just don't need her healing for 600, 700. It's just too much.
Yeah, we originally wanted to give her a very healing heavy kit and just make her like identity super like just a very good healer, but it turns out that it ends up in really bad combat states where you feel terrible. You killed 0 units because that Silas got healed 40 times by this Nami back to full. So we're kind of evening it out here where like the Nami will still heal a lot, but like she gets to output more damage. And if you want to itemize her damage, she's not going to be amazing, but she can do things and actually like kill boards so that you can end fights rather than just like stalling them forever.
Yep. Anivia. Anivia is a 3 cost that we want you to be excited about. If you have an early Shojin and an Archangel and Anivia, great. That you should be excited. We can't really change her targeting in the short term or anything like that. So what we want to do is just make sure that she can cast more often. Hopefully this pushes Anivia to an exciting premier carry. So
Yeah, even with this and the 3 cost, you'll see in the 3 cost 80 section, we buffed her spell damage too. So should be a small, decent size buff to Anivia.
Yep.
Small nudge.
Zoe, very minor nerf here. Very minor. We just don't want her casting quite as soon. So going from 50 starting to 30 starting. The spell damage from the Lux Laser is going to go down just a little bit here. We don't really need Zoe doing more damage than like Aurelian Soul. That's probably incorrect for a 5 cost. So bringing that down. Daisy's getting a little more health at 2-star. It was falling over a little bit, and the jump from 1 to 2-star wasn't really worth it. And the Daisy Slam, kind of going back to that same thing. That Daisy Slam was doing a lot of damage. I've seen it one-shot Aoshen 2s. Just a little too much, and so that's getting a pretty big nerf. It's still 1,000 base damage at 2-star, which is a lot. It'll probably still do a truckload of damage, but it didn't need to do that much.
Yeah, Zoe has very impactful spells and casting within 50 mana at the start of a fight, or if you give her, Archangel Shojin, she casts in 1 auto, and it's way too quick into the fight, like few seconds in the fight and your backline is blown up, plus there's an extra 2,800 health Daisy on the board. So slowing this down will help with combat pacing. She gets to still be like cycle relatively fast. We're happy with how that 100 mana cycle feels. But yeah, it was just she was casting way too fast into the fight.
All right. All right. Big changes here. The 10-cost dragons are something that just hasn't lived up to the fantasy of OMG 10-cost dragons. So we're trying to take a pass here and balance them. Now, the one dragon that has is Aoshen. Aoshen is in honestly a pretty good spot. So only minor changes to Aoshen. The first of which is he's getting some health back. We don't need him being a fragile little flower. We want him being like a big dragon. So we get some health back. At the cost of 1-star damage was a little too high. And so this is a pretty chunky, 12, 15% nerf to 1-star Aoshen. In addition, it felt really weird to have him do a bunch of damage and you just not gain any mana. The mana reduction hasn't really played out as like an interesting tech tool or anything like that. Honestly, it could probably be gotten rid of. For now, we're just going to go light. But 2-star Aoshen should be just as scary as he is right now. Technically more so with the health. If you get a 2-star Aoshen, you should be feared. And so that's not changing.
Yeah, mainly targeting like just 1-star needs to come down, but we're with this entire slide, we're aiming to bring the other units up to Aoshen's level, where you really are excited about this and really, really strong when you 2-star them.
Speaking of which, let's talk about Aurelian Soul. If you look at these changes, you're probably thinking they're out of their minds. And I hope you're right, because we want Aurelian Soul to be special. So what's happening here? He's getting the health. Great. The mana's going down to 0 out of 60, so he'll actually take a little longer to get that first cast, but like a blue buff on Aurelion Sol should be pretty good here. So he'll be able to cast pretty quick. Now keep in mind he still has the long channel time, and so we have to account for that. The spell damage is going up 10% at 1 star, so better at 1 star, but massively at 2 star. If you get a 2 star Aurelion Sol and you're willing to put like Death Cap, Jeweled Gauntlet on him, he's going to hit hard. He's going to hit really hard, and you should be rewarded for that, and that's going to be good. Now, the counterplay to Aurelion Sol is spread out, right? Because sometimes he'll solo ult the like Twitch in the corner, or he'll only hit the front line. And so it can take a while for him to kill stuff, but if you can get to that 15-second mark instead of 20-second, which is a pretty big buff, he'll go, okay, I'm tired of missing. Time to hit the whole board. Now, because he hits it sooner, we're not going to give him a 50% damage amp. That'll go down to 30. But Aurelion Sol, 15 seconds in, gonna be scary. Aurelion Sol 2, very powerful dragon. Not something to look down on here. So
Yeah, so if basically this change will make him cycle a lot quicker, he can more consistently kill units on the board because his spell damage is up, but also because he's, just casting more often. And like when he's not working, then your goal is like, can we get this Aurelion Sol at 15 seconds so that he can continue to be consistent and like hit the entire board for 700 damage, which is a lot of base damage. So he should be feared now for this patch.
Yep. And then finally, Shyvana. Shyvana had this problem, and I told the story in the patch postmortem, but if you had a Shyvana doing 66% health damage, hitting a Twitch 1, it still didn't kill the Twitch 1. Percent health damage really didn't work for Shyvana. It created this weird thing where unless you had AP, she was bad. So we're switching her to normal damage structures, which means she can actually burn through and take down weak targets. She doesn't need full AP. Because of that, we're taking out a little bit of HP so that she doesn't need to have, 8,000 health with Shapeshifter. But she gets armor and MR, so it's still effective health, and so it's still good. And then this damage should be very powerful. So now I imagine you can run like a Titan's, Bramble, or Warmogs, and then an AP item, even like a Morello, and do a good amount of damage to the team and actually be really, really good here. This dragon should be good now. And we fixed the issue where sometimes she would get CC'd during the dive bomb and not get that cast. That's fixed because now she's immune to CC during the dive bomb. And so Shyvana is another champion that if you can 2-star this champion, you're going to get a lot of powerful damage, a great frontliner with a lot of health, Rage Wing built in, so it has that Omnivamp built in. I can't imagine Shyvana being weak from this point on.
Yeah, the dive bomb immune to CC just made a lot of sense because she's in the air while she's getting stunned, and so now she'll be immune, land, and breathe her fire, and whatever she breathes her fire on will probably die. Especially if it's like a 1-star Twitch, it's no longer spending all of her time breathing fire to kill that 1-star Twitch. She'll kill it quickly, then move on and like start breathing fire on other things and damaging other parts of the board, which will make her a lot more consistent. So when you itemize her, it'll feel a lot better because Shyvana will actually be able to deal damage. And even if you want to make her a tank, her base stats are still really high. Her base spell damage is still really high. So even if you build her as a tank, she'll still be contributing damage to your board, just not in the same like ultra carry potential, but still really good.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a challenge for people to figure out her best itemization now because I don't think it's full AP like it was last patch.
Yeah, it's going to be more of like a tanky mix where like 2 damage items are Titans and then like 1 tanky item so that she can cast them multiple times. But
yep,
yeah, let's see.
Cool. Items, kind of along the AD nerf with the scaling. Deathblade gets the same treatment, so it scales pretty similarly. Deathblade is now 35, 50, 65. Luminous Deathblade also gets nerfed a bit.
Yeah, so these are where making the statement that like AD is not valued the same as AP when we give it out. AD is just a lot more valuable in general, and so we're reducing this, and so that's why there's disparity now between Deathblade and Deathcap, a bigger disparity than there already was.
Yep. Morellonomicon, kind of been a dead item for most of the set. We want to position this as a slightly worse Deathcap with built-in anti-heal. And so to get it to that point, Deathcap is 75 AP, so Morello's going to be 50 instead of 30. That's a pretty big buff, but now that should be the trade-off is like, do I want that anti-heal? This is why I was saying like Morello might be very good on Shyvana. More Morellonomicon, same thing. But this should position them as like an okay replacement for Deathcap.
Yeah, arguably too big of a buff. It's a pretty big buff, but like also this set we're kind of struggling with finding Morello users, especially like on non-tanks. So this should definitely help with that, and maybe incentivize you to put this on one of the other better, one of the few like Morello users, basically.
Yep. And then finally, Thieves Gloves. Ran into a few too many situations, I think, for players where like level 6, level 7, level 8, and you would get some really bad item combinations. Some of our lower tiers, like nothing worse than being level 8 and getting an item and a component from a Thieves Gloves. So basically, we buffed the odds of getting better item combos at level 6 and higher. This should feel a lot better. It is a buff to Thieves Gloves, just straight up. If somebody wants to see the table later on Twitter, it's fine. It's not hugely different, but basically, better Thieves Gloves item combos.
Yep.
Cool. Augments. I'm going to try to power through. We can go through these. Cruel Pact is getting reworked. We want this to be an augment that's not a trap. Definitely give this a try and let us know. But now we also have levers that we can tune here. Basically, it's going to cost you more HP to level up. It went from from 4 to 6, but you restore 3 HP per turn. So now there's some like trickiness to it of like, when do you level? When do you hold? So you're still going to hit level 7 pretty quickly if you want, but you can actually get back up and have a hope of hitting level 8.
Yeah, one of the interesting decisions around this is when you should go to level 8, because there is a point in time where like you can definitely go to level 8, but you get to make the decision of, can I greed a little bit more? Because since you're never going level 9, every single round that you wait, you get the free EXP, which saves you HP, which means the more you greed, the more chances you have to hit level 8. But if you lose a round, then all of that greeding like goes to waste. And so there's some like interesting gameplay there where you have to like scout the lobby, figure out, am I strong enough, that kind of thing, and play around that. So I think it becomes a lot more interesting rather than the current state of rush 7 and just play around there.
Yep. Okay, some quick ones here. Devastating Charge gets a buff, was a little weak. Gear Upgrades gets a buff, was a little weak. Heroic Presence gets a buff, was a little weak. Ricochet gets a little buff, was a little weak. Just some minor buffs there. Anything to talk about?
No, nothing to add.
Cool. Gadget Expert was a very good augment, providing a lot of power. The static shiv was good. Early game, this augment was just too good. So lowering that damage from 40% to 33%. Real talk, it's still going to be a great augment. It just didn't need that much extra bonus true damage.
Yeah, granting a static shiv is already a lot of power, and like making that even stronger is just so much power. So yeah, it's still going to be a good augment even after the nerfs.
Yep. Luden's overperforming in the early game, so we're nerfing it, and it's nice that we have this built-in scaling now, because we don't think it's OP in the late game, which means we don't have to nerf the late game. So like Luden's all still reaches its same cap, it just gets there a little bit slower. So like stage 2, Luden's 2, going from 85 to 55 is a big nerf, but that's also when it's like kind of insanely OP. Whereas Luden's 2 in stage 5 is now the same. This should be a healthier curve for Luden's.
Yeah, we've seen players, when players play around this, it's a blue buff Ezra, blue buff Karma, or you're playing mages, and it just procs so often with that flat damage. It's so much power in the early game, and so by lowering that, we get to reduce the ceiling of the early game. And so it should be a lot healthier basically for the game while keeping the late game still interesting.
Yep. Reckless Spending. Reckless Spending is probably the worst augment in the game. I think it literally is the worst augment in the game right now. Because all you can do is spend 6 gold to give 50% damage to Volibear, Aatrox, Zoe, Idis, a bunch of champs that really don't need it. We're going to change it so that you can choose the champions that get the buff by putting Shimmer Scale items on them. So in a Shimmer Scale comp, this can literally be your whole team. This can be a Xayah, a Corki that have a Draven's Axe on them. The damage amp is going down to 40%, but should still be very good. Hopefully this gets it to a pretty good spot. It's still going to be pretty niche because it is hard to use, but like in those cases it should be very good. If this doesn't work, we'll see, but again, this should be a pretty big buff actually.
Yeah, giving 40% to your primary carry like a Xayah should be a lot. And to clarify a little bit on the mechanics, right now the way it works is like as soon as you press the 2 buttons, F and D, then you'll get, the buffs on the units. But this is going to change a little bit. It's because you can move Shimmer Scale items. So there's no like messing around here by moving all the Shimmer Scale items to each unit, then re-triggering it. But it's at the beginning of combat, whoever has Shimmer Scale items and is a Shimmer Scale unit will gain this buff if you've done the trigger from the planning phase.
Nice. All right. Then on the crown / soul side, we wanted to do some buffs and nerf. These are very clearly buffs and nerfs, so like I make it very clear here. So for example, Assassin Crown no longer gets an Infinity Edge, it gets a Hand of Justice. This is intended to be a nerf. Like Assassins really love IE. It's a very powerful augment. They don't need a free IE, lowering that. Cavalier Crown, same thing. Sunfire down to Redemption. It's intended to be a nerf. Guardian Crown gets a Sunfire. Now you might be like, why does Guardian Crown get a Sunfire and not Cavalier? Well, because Cavalier Crown is a better emblem, and so trying to balance it, we can use items as balance levers here. Revel Crown, the best performing prismatic in the game right now, doesn't need a free static shiv on top of the ability to access Revel Deja. So we're going to grant it no items, see how this goes. This is obviously a very big nerf. Want to see how it plays out. Scale Scorn Crown, big nerf. Giant Slayer to Hand of Justice, less of a big nerf, but it's a nerf. Shimmer Scale Soul, small buff. We're going to give you that Volibear instead of the Cane. Getting a 3 cost should be fine. And then Tempest Crown, small buff here. Hand of Justice into Static Shiv.
Yeah, nothing to add here. Everything's pretty straightforward, and like we're just tuning power levels based on things that are overperforming, underperforming.
Great. On the small side, Astral 9 is pretty cool if you can get to it. Not that many people play it, but Astral 9's kind of fun. What's really annoying, though, is when you hit Astral 9 and you start rolling for those Astral Orbs and you, like, just get 4 gold over and over, it feels awful. So instead, if you hit 9 Astral, we want you to get a lot of items. That's kind of supposed to be the payoff of 9 Astral. So that drop rate went from 30% to 75%. You were going to get a lot of items if you're playing 9 Astral. Guardian, yeah. I'll go power through these since we're on small. Guardian 4 and 6, just going to get buffed. They're just not really worth it. A lot of Guardian 2, so no need to buff that, but 4 and 6 should be fine. Jade 3, very small nerf here, just a little less attack speed in the early game to make it not quite as good. But 9 gets a bit of a buff to make it more worth it. And then 12, if you miracle pull it off, we want this. This is like the chase of chases. It should feel amazing. 200% instead of 100%. We want you to win if you hit this, like, please. And the funny thing is, it still isn't a guaranteed win. Like, you can still get bursted down through it, but it should be very strong. Revel, we're nerfing 2 and 3 a little bit more. Same thing, trying to get it to where the trait isn't quite as just like free damage, especially in the early game, but keeping 4 the same. And if you go 5, it's actually getting a buff. If you want to go 5 Revel, we want to pay that off. And then Scale Scorn 6 is a very hard trait to hit. You need 2 emblems. It's not really at the level it should be, so we're buffing that so that 6 Scale Scorn should be one of those really rare chase traits.
I just want to touch on Astral, where it's like, this looks like a pretty large buff, and, we're also buffing Aurelion Soul, and it's like, wow, isn't Astral just going to be too strong? But we're also this is kind of compensation for, we're nerfing all 3-star AD levels, and so that will hit the comp, and so giving you, making it so that, once you've 3-starred all of your units, you have a little bit less power, but now that you have more items, you can continue to cap that power even higher by playing 9 Astral. The other thing is 12 Jade, just kind of anyone who played set 5, kind of similar to Sentinels. When you hit that 9 Sentinels, you just felt like invincible. It should kind of feel like that because it's hard to get to and should be very powerful.
Yep. On the champ side, again, going to power through these. Alawi, still just a little tanky, even with the nerfs. Just want to lower that a little bit. Silas, the repeat cast, very tiny here. This is not meant to be a big nerf. We still want Silas being a premier champion. He still does a 2-hex AoE mono reave. He's still going to be desirable. Just a teeny tiny bit less. Itis 2 gets a little bit of a buff here, just so that the difference between 1 and 2 is a little bit bigger. And then Itis 3 gets a bit of a self-heal buff. Nothing crazy. Itis 3 is still great. It's just can stay alive a little longer. Siphon, one of the biggest changes. I think it's a quality of life change. You could debate it, but there's nothing worse than a Siphon charging in, getting ready to do a 6,000 damage bite, and then it dodges because the person had 1 glove. That feels awful. So Siphon's bite is now undodgeable. He just eats them. Hooray! And then finally, Pike, just making him a little tankier. This is, again, we're trying to nudge Pike to where we really want him to be for a legendary. So just a little bit more armor and MR.
Yeah, we really put a lot of emphasis on Siphon's bite by taking away a lot of his damage from his charge, and so we don't want that bite to not pay off, because that's kind of the whole identity of the unit.
Yep. Cool. On the augment side, AFK, you can no longer move items while AFK is active, so slam them before you pick it, I guess. Electro Charge, kind of like Luden's, Electro Charge 1 was overperforming a little bit in the early game for a tier 1, so nerfing that just a bit, but actually gets a tiny buff at like stage 5. Electro Charge 3, on the other hand, was just underperforming, period, and so it gets a buff at stage 3, 4, and 5. Featherweights 3, tiny underperforming, minor buff. Jeweled Lotus, extra 5% crit, minor buff. Trade Sector Plus just gets a little bit more gold, so it can be a little bit more worth it. Recombobulator, this is probably the biggest change. The difference in highs and lows between Recombobulator was too extreme. For example, I had a 3-star Volibear turn into a 3-star Deja. That's a little much. Likewise, there would be nothing worse than your 2-star Deja becoming a 2-star Bard instead of a Dragon. That ends up being a downgrade, so we're removing that, and it will actually only go up in the same angle. So, for example, my Volibear can become a Zaya, it cannot become a Dragon. Likewise, my Deja can become a Shyvana, it can't become a Zoe. And so this should help some of the normalization of Recombobulator. And then finally, Anima Visage, Infinity Force, and Random and Sanctum. These Ornn items, honestly, them being unique is causing more harm than good. In the rare case you can get 2 of them, we want you to enjoy it. So enjoy those not being unique.
I want to see someone live the dream of double Infinity Force on one of their carries. It'll be fun.
Nice. And then finally, bug fixes. Do I have to read these all? Holy crap. All right, here we go. Astral Shop odds are now affected by Bard and high-end shopping. Woohoo! Varus no longer stops attacking when his tendrils spread out of his primary target. I believe this is just visual, right? It's like a visual attacking.
No, he right now, as his tendrils are spreading out, he stops attacking. So now he will just continue firing like that bullet, basically that extra bullet, basically that he stops. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Monozane and Radiant Blue Buff now work with Ragewing units. Cool. Summon units no longer become invincible when their player owner surrenders mid-combat. Good. No more of that they FF'd and now I lose. Cannoneer Emblem no longer causes Swain to stop using his spell and no longer sometimes replaces Elise, Siphon, and Shioyu spells with the cannon shot. Cool. Shen Dodge VFX now plays at 1-star. That's nice. We actually get to see the dodge aura. That's good.
Yeah.
Yasuo's third slash will now deal damage to units that are immune to crowd control. No more hard countered by QS. Fixed most, hopefully all, of Corki's spell fizzling. Fixing fizzles is always tricky, and Corki has been especially tough, but hopefully we've gotten rid of most of his fizzles. If you see any, let us know. Please do. Fixed an issue allowing 3 trait augments to be offered together, so that should feel better now that that's fixed. Trainers can no longer gain extra snacks under specific circumstances. Looking at you, Challenger bug abusers. Siphon will now cast his ability while under the effects of Edge of Night and Zonya's Paradox. Cool. Mages will now retain the proper amount of mana with Axiom Arc if they kill units with their first cast. This should make Axiom Arc not a bait with mages, so hopefully that makes that augment better. Fixed Radiant Spear of Shojin's mana gain VFX. Yay. If Zoe's target dies during her first spell cast and her second mage cast is Daisy, she will now spawn Daisy at her own location instead of not spawning Daisy at all. Sweet. Units should now properly try and star up after Recombobulator transforms them. If you haven't seen the clip of 3 Twitches, that clip is hilarious.
3 rats.
Yep. Arena lighting now properly updates when traveling between arenas. Sweet. Remove the mana icon and blue battery. Sweet. Glamorous Gauntlet now shows the bonus AP in yellow text, and Blue Blessing now states it grants 50 starting mana. So, bug fixes. Woohoo!
Whoa, that arena lighting one was so annoying. I don't think everyone experiences it, but like, oh my god, the lighting changes and you need to keep pressing space bar to like prevent it. But
yep.
So glad that's fixed.
Yep. Cool. And that's it. Like I said, I think it looks like a bigger patch than it actually is. The end result should actually just be pretty similar, with 10 cost dragons being better, Astral Champs being not nearly as strong, and a healthier meta. So that's hopefully where we're at here. That's kind of the summation. It looks like a lot, it really does, but I promise you, play it and it shouldn't feel that different. If it feels like balance thrashing, we've done it wrong. A lot of the comps that do well should still do well. I expect Guild Zaya to still be fine, Corki to still be fine, Mage into Aoshen to still be good. We're not trying to like widely change the meta here. We're just trying to do some longer term good to the game.
And it's also like, we're doing this patch. It's like, oh, but things aren't changing, but it's like we're trying to make more things viable. 9 Rage Wing, you play Shyvana because Shyvana is really good now. That should be a thing. You should be able to play Evoker Asol, you should be able to play Astral Asol. Lots of different options, and our goal here is to make it so that, especially with the 10 cost dragons, but kind of with any carry in the game, including like a Nivea and things like that, you have other options to play outside of what you are currently able to play in this patch.
Yep. Cool. All right, I think that's going to do it for us. Like I said, a lot of tournaments on this patch, so it should be fun to see how it goes. Hopefully, we end up in a good spot. Keep giving us feedback. Yeah. Anything else you want to
add? No, I think you got it all. Have fun, everyone.
All right. Well, that's going to do it from us. Until next time, take it easy.